John had a problem. In the emotionally fraught days after 9/11, after the terrorist attacks, he felt a strong urge to do something to support, to show his support for America. And so he decided to put a flag decal on the back of his vehicle. It might seem not like that big of a deal for those of you who responded in more intense ways, but for him, it felt like a big deal. He said the urge came out of nowhere, and with no connection to anything that he had ever done. He said it was as if there was this ancient box in the back of his brain that he didn't even know was there, with a sign on it that said, "In case of foreign attack, break open." I didn't know the alarm was there, but I had this overwhelming sense to show my sense of being an American. I wanted to do something, he said. He gave blood. He donated money to the Red Cross. He was more open with strangers and more helpful with them. He wanted to display, he said, his team membership by showing the flag in some way. But he was a professor at the University of Virginia, and professors don't do such things. When you see an American flag on a car in the UVA parking lot, he wrote, staff parking lot, he said, you can bet that the car belongs to a secretary or a blue-collar worker. Flag waving and nationalism, Jonathan wrote, are for conservatives. Professors like him are liberal, globe-trotting universalists, reflexively wary of saying that their nation is better than any other nation. So after 3 days and a welter of feelings, he said, that he had never felt before, he found a solution to his dilemma. In the back window of his car, in the lower left-hand corner, he put a decal of an American flag, and in the bottom right-hand corner, he put a flag of the United Nations. That way, he said, I could announce that I loved my country, but don't worry, folks, I don't put my country above others. This was, after all, an attack on the whole world, sort of, right? It's supposed to be funny, okay? It's okay to laugh. It's humorous because I think it shows something to us, which is flag waving is complicated. We all have our flags. We have in this sanctuary an American flag over here. Yeah, you might not know that we also have a Methodist flag over there. The flag of the American nation, the flag of our denomination. But there are other flags that we wave. We wave the rebel flag, the flag of the Ole Miss Rebel football team. We wave the Mississippi State Bulldog flag. There's the Republican nation and the Democratic nation. There are a number of flags that are waved in our midst. And the truth is, for me, I've got people in my family that wave all the flags. I don't know about you. But it's complicated, right? It's complicated because we tend to gather around a particular flag, but we're also drawn to loyalties in another direction. Our community is also divided between those who gather around a flag over here and those who gather around this flag over there. And in the Bible, we find that such as it ever was. There always have been these divisions running through communities. Just look at this letter from Paul to the Corinthians. If you read this letter, it's really interesting because you for a moment see and understand that you're reading somebody else's mail. My friend LaRue is a retired Methodist pastor, and in his retirement, he's been looking through some of his father's papers, and he found this treasure trove of letters that his father, as a soldier, wrote during World War II to his mother in the early days of their courtship. And it just shows over the course of the letters the growth of their relationship and also the history of the nation. At one moment, he walks into a bar, and there's the actor Ronald Reagan at the bar. It's interesting when you're reading somebody else's mail because you get to see into the intimacy of their relationships. And sometimes that's really good, like when you see something about your parents that you didn't know. But it can also be kind of embarrassing for the people if things are not going so well in the relationship. And that's what we have in 1 Corinthians. I think they would be embarrassed to know that their letter that they received from Paul has been broadcast through the centuries because it portrays them in an unflattering light. They are in this tense moment of division, And it gives us this privileged glimpse into the first generation of the Christian movement. The church in Corinth was in this community that was important. It was prosperous, very diverse, because it was a commercial crossroads, trade routes on the north-south and east-west direction. And so you had this mix of people, wealthy, elite folks, and working class, blue-collar, free and slave, educated and not, rich and poor, Greeks and Jews, and Romans and people from all over the world. It's a very religiously diverse community as well. There were statues and temples to gods and goddesses. I don't know if they waved flags at that time, but if they did, there would be a number of them across the city. Paul, the apostle, was a community organizer and church planner. He spent 18 months founding this church in Corinth. He gathered up and had this network of relationships with leaders in the community, and he did extensive teaching. But as was his custom, after he kind of got it off the ground, he moved on to another place. And when he moved on to another place, he moved on to other work. But he kept up with the communities that he founded through letters. And that's what's going on here. He's become aware of a problem in the community. And the problem has come through a report from Chloe's people. Chloe was one of the well-placed patrons of the community, and presumably some of her household servants have found Paul in another part of the world and have told him what's going on. And what's going on in the church is that the church that Paul loved, that he founded, was being torn open by divisions. And Chloe, through her people, is telling Paul, you got to do something about it. Everything's fallen apart. You got to figure out how to work with this group of people. And this is the way Paul writes it in the letter in verse 10 of chapter 1. Now, after he's kind of lathered them up with praise, okay, as one does. Now I appeal to you, brothers and sisters, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you be in agreement and that there be no divisions among you, but that you be united in the same mind, having the same purpose. It's been reported to me by Chloe's people that there are some quarrels among you. What the nature of the quarrels was, he begins to lay out. What I mean by this is that each of you is saying, I belong to Paul, I belong to Apollos, I belong to Cephas. As if to say that within the community there were these allegiances that were forming to different charismatic leaders in the early church. Paul, Apollos, another teacher, Cephas, that is Peter. And then there's some people who are just going to rise above the fray and say, I belong to Christ. I'm not going to deal with all this. And Paul thinks that this is problematic because he sees within these divided allegiances to particular charismatic leaders a threat to the community that he loves. It's the kind of thing, so kind of to get a slightly better picture, church historians tell us that the Corinthian church is not like our church in the sense that there wasn't just one building and everybody gathered under one roof, but rather the church at Corinth was a network of different house churches, probably 30 to 50 people over here in Gaius's house, say, 30 to 50 people over there in Stephanus's house, 30 and 50 people over here. And it was probably, 150, 250 people in a network of house churches. So what's happening is that over here in this house church, they're remembering Paul and getting excited about his leadership. But over here, maybe Apollos, and over there, Cephas. And it's not just that they're gathered around charismatic leaders. It's also, Paul interestingly points out that this association and allegiance to leaders is connected to the sacrament of baptism. He says, has Christ been divided? Was Paul crucified? Were you baptized in the name of Paul? And then he kind of goes on, and this is where Paul is kind of rhetorically at his best, because he says, I don't remember baptizing any of you, maybe Gaius and Crispus, but actually I baptized a few others, the house of Stephanus, but beyond that, I don't know, I don't remember baptizing anyone. And it's funny, it's meant to be funny because Paul rhetorically is trying to de-emphasize the divisions that they may be having over the sacrament of baptism. And you just think about that. Even something as important as the sacrament of baptism, if there are divisions there that have cropped up, are not so important that you should divide the church over, Paul seems to be saying. he kind of moves on into this, and he says, kind of gets to the main point. He says, "For Christ did not send me to baptize, but to proclaim the gospel, not with words of eloquent wisdom, so that the cross of Christ might not be emptied of its power." For Paul, one of the dangers in dividing ourselves over anything less than the cross of Christ is that they're blind spots for us. Whether we gather and divide ourselves around, powerful, charismatic leaders or around points of ideological difference, he sees a danger in that, because if you divide yourself on things less than the cross of Christ, Paul seems to think that they're blind spots that we could be missing. We tend to think that we look at issues, fairly rationally. We look at the issues on the table, we figure out what's going on, and then we line up with what's right. And of course, we do that, and we kind of line up along these party lines. But in some ways, we lose our ability to see perhaps the complete or more complex picture of reality. Some moral psychologists have said that morality binds and also blinds. It's easy to see this in people that wave the other flag, right? If you really don't like people to go out and say X or Y or Z thing, it's clearly easy to say, you will not believe what they say about X or Y or Z. And then, on the other side as well. Morality and ideological flag waving, it's one of the ways any program, ideological program, has places where it binds together, but also blind spots. What happens is we tend to run and ask the question, where do my people line up on this? Or what would my kind of people say about this? And what happens is it's potentially a distortion of reality, because it can blind us by leading us to downplay the mixed emotions of our group while we blow out of proportion the hostile intentions of the other crowd, and we just miss the complexity of the situation. Now, I think one of the caveats that has to be made is that I'm not saying that the church should not be aware of places of hatred or prejudice or bigotry or any of those things, and those things need to be lifted up. Division can be healthy, conflict can be really good. That's not my point. The point is that if any of those things become the center, then perhaps we've missed something, that we're in danger of something. Paul seems to be saying we've failed to sense the complete picture. I love that. Y'all know John Prine? I love John Prine. One of the songs of John Prine's that I really, really love and was remembering this week is "Your Flag Decal Won't Get You Into Heaven Anymore." Y'all remember this song? Somebody's given all these flag decals, and John Prine has put them on his window shield. He says, "Well, I got my window shield so filled with flags I couldn't see. I ran the car upside a curb and right off into a tree." And I think that that's kind of what Paul's getting at. That when you have flags pasted all over your life, telling you who you are, you have to be careful that it doesn't obscure the direction that you're called to travel in. And for Paul, the direction the church is called to travel in is always the direction of the cross. "For Christ did not send me to baptize, but to proclaim the gospel, so that the cross of Christ might not be emptied of its power." The word of the cross was what created the Corinthian community. It's the same word that creates our church today. It's the word about the cross that has power within it to name and create and to break the powers of sin and death and brokenness. But what happens for me, and maybe this happens for you as well, is that I tend to empty the cross of its power by living my life as a practical atheist. I think we all do this from time to time. We hedge our bets. In the face of fragility and insecurity, we make plans. We maneuver politically. We make sure to assert ourselves so that people will know that we have power. We make sure that if something goes wrong, we won't be so far out on the branch of the cross that lest we lose something, lest the branch get cut off and we be left with nothing. I love the way that the theologian Natalie Carnes puts it in describing the cross. She says this: that Christ on the cross breaks brokenness itself. The cross is God's refusal to let violence be determinative. For on the cross, Christ reveals God to be love all the way down. Christ shows that love is not so shallowly rooted in the universe that it can be pulled up by trial or torture. This is a love that's so deeply embedded in the fabric of the cosmos that even death cannot alter it. To break the one who is love itself simply discloses the depth of the love that moves the universe. One might say that on the cross, Christ is the rock of love, and the power of death is the wave that beats against the rock. There is power in the cross of Jesus Christ, but it's not like the other powers of this world. It's a power that doesn't depend on our wisdom or our constructions or our sense-making. It doesn't depend on us at all. The vindication comes from the power of God alone. And what this means is it's challenging because it means that we can't save ourselves as much as we want to save ourselves, that we need a power and a presence and a word that is not our own, but from God. And it also is really confusing because it means that we can't make of the world and we can't make of the church what we would want. We can't make them turn out the way that we would want, as much as we would hope to. But we hope and we pray that we can live according to the grace that we've seen in the cross of Jesus Christ. And the cross, which is at the center of the church, it invites us to be a part of a new community beyond all the communities that we would create for ourselves. Beyond our limitations and our blindness and the ways in which we obscure by our own vision, but we're still invited into an opportunity to participate in the very power of God revealed in the cross. There is power that is in the cross that continues to be available to the church despite the ways that we domesticate it and manipulate it and try to use it for our own ends. We're called as a church to be a community gathered around the cross, nothing more and nothing less. But if we're honest with ourselves, that doesn't make good sense. It just doesn't make good sense. Religious studies tends to talk about religions as a sense-making enterprise. Why do we have religions? We fear death. We don't know what's going on the other side, and religions help us make sense of that reality. But for Paul, the cross is not about sense-making, it's foolishness. He says this, for the message about the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it's the very power of God. For it is written, I thought, Diane, you did such a fabulous job reading this part. I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discerning of the discernment I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where's the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the wise? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know the wisdom through God through wisdom, so God decided through the foolishness of our proclamation to save those who believe. Religions try to make sense of things. Jews demand signs. Greeks demand wisdom. The Romans demanded power and military might. And the cross of Jesus Christ deconstructs all of our sense-making enterprises. It's foolishness. It's crazy. It's madness. To say that we can't ensure ourselves by our own power and that we need the power of God revealed in the cross to make us what God desires. It means that to really have a life that God desires, that we have to live in such a way that our lives would be meaningless apart from the cross. It means that we have to live in such a way that we follow the cross, which is foolish. How do we even begin to do that becomes my question. And I love the way one New Testament scholar puts the first step. It says, this is J. Lewis Martin. He says, what the cross is a transformation of our imagination. When we look at the world through human eyes, all we see is a world that's torn apart. Problems upon problems, the poor sitting in the dust of the rich, and there's only power that rules. There's no truth or goodness or beauty, and it's not good. But if you put on the lenses of faith, you begin to see the world differently. You can see the world through the lens of the cross, and that will allow you to see the very same world. But in the far field, you also see something else. God gives you the eyes to see through all the silliness of human contrivances, God working God's purposes over the long haul. And I think that's what we're called to as a church, to center our life on the cross, looking to God's intentions being fulfilled over the long haul. What would it look like for us to begin to look at the world through the foolishness of the cross as a church, as individuals, maybe as young people? I think for young people especially, what it may look like is that there may come a time when your devotion to Christ leads you to do something that your parents think is foolish. There may come a time when your devotion to Christ would lead you to leave a major that you think is the one that your parents want you to do in order to do the one that God is passionately calling you towards. My sister could have married any fraternity boy in the university. She dated all of them. Not all of them. She dated a lot of them. She dated a lot of them. And I remember the guy who had like the $1 million business, that flew her out to the woodlands in Texas and gave her 6 North Face jackets, right? That she didn't marry. She married the missionary guy that had the long beard. Our whole family thought she was a fool. I'm serious. We left Tupelo. We had a very beautiful sanctuary where we could have had a wedding. We all got tripped out to this missionary camp in Wedowee, Alabama, on the side of a hill. And we thought she was a fool. And at the end of it, my great aunt, she looked out over the whole thing and she just shook her head. She said, "This doesn't make any sense." But for Laura, it made total sense to give her life not only to Nate, but to a vision of God's kingdom breaking in through the mission of the, students in faith and technology was the mission. They're not there any longer, but it was a choice to do something foolish for Christ that didn't make sense to our family, but was in keeping with the cross at the center of her life. Sometimes this doesn't mean the foolishness of the gospel doesn't mean you have to choose a foolish career, right? Career trajectory. Maybe you actually have to pay the bills, right? And keep up with, I have to do that. I can't go be a missionary. I've got to pay the bills and care for my family. So for you, maybe your life, as a lawyer or a filmmaker or a business person or in whatever field you're in, that you need to begin to look at your field and your vocation through the lens of the cross, and you would begin to see different things, especially when there are people who are trying to narrow the vision of the field to the bottom line. I've heard one example of this, of a guy named Tommy Delmonico. Tommy was a poor Italian guy who went to medical school. He was looking down a mountain of debt near the end of medical school, and he came to that moment in school where he needed to pick a trajectory, and he picked plastic surgery, even though his friends looked at him kind of funny because he felt like he could make some bank by being a plastic surgeon, and he did make bank, and it was good because he needed bank because he had a lot of debt. A few years into his life as a plastic surgeon, he got a call from a headhunter. Smile Train is this organization that was looking to recruit plastic surgeons to go on trips all over the world to help poor kids that had cleft palates breathe better. And so he decided to go. It was low cost or no cost work, but he went. He found himself more invigorated by the work there than anything he did back in his practice. And then he went the next spring and the next year, and he began to save up vacation time so he could go out and do this work that he felt called to do. On one of those trips, there was another plastic surgeon from his city. Then they began to strike up a conversation. The other plastic surgeon said, "I don't know about you, but I feel like my whole life has been pointing in this direction. What if we went back home and started our own practice? It'd be crazy, right? We could start our own practice focused on this kind of mission, and we could gather techs and nurses and all the rest to do this kind of work. What do you think? Committed to the common good, doing something that makes a difference, let's do it." They set it up as a job-sharing program, not interested in just making a lot of money, but also doing something that would be in keeping with their faith. The cross is foolishness. It's crazy to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it's the power of God. And when the foolishness of the cross gets into the heart of the church, it's really exciting. You begin to do something as a church that you wouldn't have ever done before. We begin to use our resources and our imagination and our lives in ways that might not make sense to the eyes of the world, but to God, the deepest wisdom. If we're willing to see in the cross the salvation of God, then even what the world makes madness, we will see within it the divinest sense. Some of you remember the band Talking Heads. They did a video about their music called Stop Making Sense. David Byrne was interviewed about that. Why did you call it Stop Making Sense? He said, because I think it's good advice. The cross is foolishness, but it is the very power of God. It's the center of our life together, nothing more and nothing less. Amen.